Hey there, welcome back to the channel. It's been a little while since we posted something here. It's been quite busy with the move, but I think things are finally in order enough to get back to the easel, and I'm really excited to do so. So with that, here today we are going to be painting this beautiful starry night sky scene. Haven't done one of those in quite some time. But we are going to jump into this today. We're going to do so with a larger flat-headed brush. As per usual, we are going to dip the bottom third of it into a little bit of water, then proceed to wipe off the excess. And as per usual, if you need help with the drawing process, you can find the traceable up over on Patreon. It'll just help you get that image on the canvas so you can jump into the painting. And up there you can also get ad-free versions of these videos. Sometimes they're posted early. We have this big bonus series we're working on a 24 by 24 inch canvas. You can get my ebooks. There's a bunch of fun stuff up there, so check it out if you're interested. But with that, we are going to start here today in the sky. I'm going to grab an abundance of ultramarine blue. We're going to grab the smallest hint of a cad red, a little bit of our titanium white, and about double that in our Mars black. When we mix this up, we should get a relatively desaturated blue, and we're just going to apply that to the top of our canvas. I'm trying to apply it fairly softly with my brush. When we apply a lot of pressure, we can rip paint off, we get these markings, but when we do it softly, it's nice and smooth. So from there, we're going to continue moving down the canvas. As you can see, I'm not worrying about the drawing underneath. We can always go back and re-sketch that. But I'm going to bring this to about the third of the canvas. And then we're going to change our pigment a little bit. It's also worth noting that I'm not just trying to drag the pigment downwards, consistently going back and grabbing more. That way we can have a nice thick sky. And we might even do a couple of layers, just to make sure that things are looking great. Also, I don't want a hard edge at the bottom. I want kind of a soft one. You can see some of the canvas tooth coming through. It's a bit more thin. And that's intentional so that we have something to blend with and we don't have a hard line if it happens to dry. Now, once we get here, we're going to double down on our cad red in this mix. I'm going to add about an equal amount to that of what we already have of paint. We're going to grab a bit of extra titanium white. You're going to see it's starting to render this desaturated bluish purple. And we're going to apply that right underneath our previous application. And then we're going to start blending it upwards in an X-shaped pattern. This is going to move paint not only horizontally, not only left and right, but it's also going to move it up and down, just like so. And as we do that, we're going to continue to interject more cad red and titanium white into this mixture. I'm going to place that yet again right below. And what are we doing with it? Blending it up in that X-shaped pattern. Now you might worry that the pigment above here is going to dry too quickly. Provided you make that brush nice and damp at the beginning, shouldn't really be a problem because it's going to extend the wet life of all of that paint. And now we're adding these subtle hints of purple into that top blue area, so it's not too simplified. From there, more titanium white and a hint of Mars black, just because we keep moving into something that's brighter, but it's also a little too saturated. We want our clouds to be more saturated, and if everything's saturated, then the clouds don't really stand out. So we're just going to add that Mars black. It'll mix with that titanium white. We'll do a nice subtle blend upwards. And you can see that we're slowly just brightening the sky at the bottom, bringing that brightness upwards, and creating something that is this beautiful transition. Now, as we get towards the bottom, we're really going to double down on that titanium white and that cad red in the mix. We're going to mix something significantly brighter than that which we've had. And remember, the pigment that we have here on the palette isn't actually going to be that which we have on the painting. And they're different because we're mixing into a pigment that's already here, pigment that is darker, pigment that has more blues in it. So if it looks a little too bright on the palette, that's actually a good thing. It should at that point. And if we lose the clouds a little bit, that's okay. We can always go back and redraw them in. Again, if you need help with the drawing process of all of these mountains and whatnot, Traceable is up over on Patreon, and make sure that process is nice and easy. Now, something fun we can do, you can see I've added a little bit of Naples yellow to my palette. We're going to grab that, we're going to work that into our titanium white and our cad red, predominantly just that area of the mix. It's going to give us a slightly warmer pink that we haven't explored. We're going to place that just towards the bottom, really brighten up this sky. And admittedly, you know, we just talked about how dipping the brush in the water, it'll keep the paint wet longer, and it does. Mine is starting to dry, it's getting a little chalky, but because I wet my brush before I went in and I did this, it's now like painting a little bit wet into dry. So despite the fact that this is drying, I'm still able to get smooth blends because these layers are semi-transparent, and when they go on, they dissipate as you move upwards through all of these different applications. Okay, so at this point, our pigment is fully dry to the touch, which is great. It means we can go in with our next application. And that's going to be the base for some clusters of stars in the background up here. I'm still using the larger flat-headed brush, and we're going to remix some of the mid to darker purples, kind of in the middle of the sky, if not a little bit downwards. So equal mixture. We'll start with our cad red and our ultramarine blue. We'll go in with some titanium white to brighten but also desaturate, Mars black to further desaturate, and we can see this mix fairly similar to ones we have in the past. We can kind of test the pigment on the side of our canvas just to see if it's close to that which we've had. I can tell that mine needs to be a little bit more desaturated, so I'm just going to interject hint more Mars black, hint more titanium white, go in with another little test on the side, and I like this. So from there, we're going to switch to our filbert brush for the first time in this lesson. This is great because it has rounded edges, and that makes it really opportune for soft blends, things like clouds, and again, what we're about to do. So from here, we're going to make that brush a little bit damp. We'll grab that pigment that we have, again, akin to this, and then we're going to move up in the painting, and with a fairly watery application, we're just going to softly apply it in little randomized patterns. We want it to be extremely transparent. So again, more water than paint. We can create little clusters and then separate portions. I want it to expand towards the top of the canvas is where I'm starting, and I'm slowly working my way back down towards the purple we were matching earlier. So eventually, towards the bottom, it just gets lost in the sky, and it just gives us this very natural movement of 2B stars. We're going to do a second one over here to the right, and this one's also going to lead down towards the middle. They're going to act as leading lines, bringing the eye towards the center of the painting, but also towards the light down below. Let me get you a bit closer. So from here, yet again, very wet brush, taking the majority of the paint off on the palette, going in the most prominent areas first, because when we first apply, we're going to have the most pigment on our brush, and the more we continue this process, the more subtle it gets, and we want it to be subtle. So I'm careful with the first applications, I'm careful with all of the applications, but I'm more careful with the first applications. And then we sparsely move it out and down. You can see that I'm going back to previous areas to make them larger. We can do a couple just out to the sides. That'll make this feel more natural. And that is very opaque. It's not what we want. So I'll go in with a lot of water. Blend it out. Acrylics are innately transparent, and when they dry darker. So that will fix itself to a point as it dries, but we want to be cautious through these applications. And again, these rounded edges are really helping me ensure that I don't have sharp lines anywhere. If I have one, I just kind of use the edge of the brush to do a soft blend, and it typically makes things a bit more ethereal, floaty, cloud-like. And these aren't clouds, but they definitely have a similar application style to a point. Let's do a little bit more down here. Oh, it feels so good to paint again. Really missed working on these canvases and doing the detailed, unique pieces like we are. Thank you for hanging in there. Thank you for waiting while I've been getting this place ready for the easel. Still a lot of boxes to unpack, still a lot of furniture to be made, but we're getting there, and my partner and I are having a really fun time getting creative, doing some different DIYs. I think we're going to paint a lot of our furniture, a design on it, potentially floral, to make it all cohesive and kind of fit together. So that's going to be fun. Maybe I'll show you a hint of that here and there. Maybe we'll do some florals on the channel. You never know. But with that, you can see all of this is so subtle, barely noticeable, but slowly builds and adds to that which we need. Alright, so from there, we're actually going to grab an abundance of our titanium white. We'll grab a hint of our ultramarine blue, just a hint. We want this to still be a fairly bright pigment. We're going to switch on over to our liner brush. First time using this, great for little intentional details, but also applying a myriad of stars out of the sky at once. And we're going to do that by making it nice and damp. We're going to grab some of this pigment. We're going to make it like watercolor though. You can see it's almost more water than it is paint. I'm going to put my brush, or my palette down rather. Then I'm going to angle my brush in the same direction as a lot of these clusters of stars. I'm going to peel back the bristles, and I'm going to just launch a great deal of these stars at the canvas. I'm peeling back my bristles. I'm letting it fly in that direction. Would recommend putting down a painting cloth so you don't get little speckles on your floor. I remember the first time I did this, I had my laptop and reference photos behind. And let me tell you, that laptop, those reference photos, they all ended up with a beautiful little star pattern. So do be mindful of that. But here, as you can see, if you get really close, you can make it extremely directional. And I like to soften a lot of the stars by just tapping my finger on there right after it's applied. Makes it nice and subtle. And then the farther away we get from the canvas, the more widespread those applications are. We want a good mix of the two. I'm also trying to keep it a bit more towards the top and the center than towards the bottom. Realistically, this gets quite bright, so you'll lose the stars visually in that area anyway. But we do want to be somewhat mindful and aim the majority of these towards the top. Just like so. We can also grab said pigment and do intentional little markings. If we do this, we need to be careful though, because these are going to be a lot larger than that which we've applied through the last technique. So they'll be noticeable. I'm going to apply them, at least initially, into the areas we just applied with a filbert, because those are highlighted. They do imply many stars in those clusters and those distant areas. And if this feels pretty dramatic initially, just keep adding them and spacing them out, and the more that happens, the more they feel natural within the piece. Especially as you move towards the farther right and left hand side. Also, the less pressure you add with your brush, the smaller the applications. The more pressure, the bigger the application. And typically we want various sized stars, so do try different pressures, and it'll make a big difference in rendering something interesting. Okay, and from here we're going to mix a bit of pink, a bit of red into that. That way we have a different color, maybe a little bit of our Naples yellow as well, and we can tap these little various colored stars into the sky as well. I'm predominantly doing so in pre-existing spaces and areas that should have those extra applications, but we're further diversifying in a very subtle way. And we're also going to want to do these to a point in the outskirts, just to draw the piece together. This is a pigment that's fairly akin to what we have at the bottom. And it's one of those things you won't notice unless you get extremely close to the canvas, but I really like to reward a viewer of a painting of art who engages to a dramatic way, who really gets in there, thinks about the palettes, the details. I like to give them something that they can really appreciate in a way that somebody who just passes by the artwork can't. And I think just sharing little colors like this in various subjects is a great way of doing that. I think it also just enhances the painting quite well in a subconscious way. Skies like this are quick and easy, and you can do them probably in 3 or 4 minutes, to be honest. I know we're 15 minutes into the painting, but if you really want to do it well, if you want to make it special, if you want to give it some character and some real life, I think taking your time doing these little steps can add a lot to a piece. There we go. Now, we can definitely do more with the sky, but we're going to take a break from that to start working on the clouds that we have down here at the bottom. These are going to have darker values, so darker darks than we have at the top here with its blues. We're going to have the most saturated pinks, so this should stand out amongst everything else, and that's great because it's towards the center and we have all these lines leading towards it. With that, we're going to grab some of our Cad Red. Everything on here is dry, so I'm not worried about blending. We're going to grab a little bit more than an equal mixture of our titanium white under a beautiful pink here. We'll grab a hint of our Naples yellow as well. Really not that much, but enough. And I'm going to go in, as you can see, with the larger flat-headed brush, at least initially, just to block in the larger shapes. I've redrawn in the clouds that I had covered up, and I'm just using the corner of the brush for the smaller clouds that we have that kind of exist towards the outskirts. Like so. Want to make them nice and soft. Want to do little taps to do protruding clouds, just like so. They kind of are reaching and it creates this larger flow upwards. And then we're also continuing the cloud down towards the bottom and the horizon. But we'll softly blend this up using a nice damp version of this brush. I just have a little bit more water on it, so I'm doing a wet into dry blend. It's creating this soft transition. Now, it's pretty saturated, pretty dramatic. We are going to now move into an ultramarine blue Mars black mix. Something, again, darker than that which we've had in the sky. We're still going to use a hint of our Cad red to make it cohesive. And then I'm going to start putting this below our last mix. It's also worth noting this isn't a Mars black. It's darker, but it's not that dark. And I'm going to put it below some of these clouds, just little hints, like so. And then what we want to do is we want to start blending the two. Now you can do that with the filbert, or you can do that with a smaller flat-headed brush. I'm going to opt for the filbert right now. And as we blend this, you can see that the pink that we applied gets significantly less dramatic, but it creates a nice transition. I'm trying to keep this fairly soft. I'm going to bring this softly back into the horizons pink. Blend that up. Then we'll grab more of our pink, maybe a little bit more titanium white, brighten it up. It'll desaturate it to a point, but that's okay. We'll reapply that to the top, and then we'll blend that back down. And we're working to get this very soft gradient from that beautiful pink at the top to the darker mix at the bottom. And that darker mix, it is admittedly getting brighter and brighter as it mixes with those pinks. So it's not what we have on the palette, but we knew that going in. There we go. Nice little mix into those darker pigments. And we're just going to want to go back and forth with this a couple of times until we get what we really want. The more layers we do, the more professional it'll look, as a good general rule for realism painting. You don't have to do that. Sometimes a thin layer can look actually really beautiful and painterly, and I very much respect and enjoy that style of art. I think for this area, though, this type of painting, we want to do a lot of layers. We're just continuing to apply those pinks towards the tops of these clouds. Continue to blend them down softly. My brush is damp, so even if the paint under it dries, we can get a wet and a dry blend. Brightening up the darks a little bit. Apologies if my hand is occasionally in the way. I have to paint on a bit of an angle here, and it isn't always easy to figure out the best orientations, but I'm trying. Okay, so it's starting to look fairly good from a distance, but what we're going to do is we're going to switch back to the liner brush. We're going to grab a little bit of titanium white, a little bit of our Naples yellow, mix that in with the pink that we've been working with, and this is going to be a new highlight for the tops of some of these clouds. And here you can see I'm just tapping it on. I'm going to create fairly hard edges with this. It's a cloud. Sometimes clouds have soft edges, sometimes they have hard edges. This time we're presenting it with some harder sides. It's just going to give the painting some additional form, which I think you could use with a fairly nebulous top area. Nebulous, that's an unintended pun. But with that, you can see that these clouds are all different. They're subtle. They're still kind of lifting up and out in this direction. It's nice and dynamic. We'll do a hint of it over here. That said, my brush is pretty wet, so it's almost like a wash at this point. And while the tops are intended to be fairly sharp, I am blending it down. And that's just going to give us the look of light wrapping its way around the cloud while still maintaining form at the top and sharpness. This is a really easy way of just building some attention in that central area of the painting, adding some details. Really like this palette. I think the Cad Red and the Naples Yellow are just beautiful together. And I think I want to overdo it. So we'll do a couple little clouds that escape up into the tops. That'll kind of bridge this textural gap between all of these taps and this area. I know you're pretty far away. I know you're probably having a hard time seeing the details. Admittedly, somewhat intentional, just because right now what's really important is looking at the painting as a whole, not necessarily the details, but taking that step back and making sure that these brights don't conflict with what we have up here, and that we do in fact have the darkest values and the most saturated values. Typically when we're too close, it's hard to distinguish, but I think it's going really well. So with that, once we have the majority of those taps on, once we've assigned those lights and darks, we can get closer, we can step closer to that canvas, and we can start applying those very intentional details. So we'll do that now. So we are a lot closer. We're going to grab some of that Naples Yellow, that Cad Red, that Titanium White. We'll still use our little liner brush to do so. And then we'll go in to the tops of some of these clouds and we'll continue to reapply that highlight. Try to add little bumps and protrusions, make unique applications so that each cloud looks a little bit different. Here this part's a bit more elongated, this is a bit more of a bump. A lot of the highlights, as you can see, are kind of on the left hand side but top of these. And so it's really helping the clouds stand out to a greater degree. Pop in a way that's pretty unique and beautiful. Fairly different up close than far away. We can even blend this out with our finger. We can do a little finger painting if we'd like. But I don't want to do too much. I like that. Almost a bit hazy. And again, I extend a couple of the clouds out. And these little taps, these little markings, reflect that of what we have at the top to a point, so that it kind of feels like there's this continuous movement of stars down into the base, but then there's stars into meeting clouds, and it all just works together in a beautiful way. There we go. Again, we can always do more with the sky, and we'll go back and we'll do so here and there. But it's a lot of back and forth and balancing later on in the painting once we've started to establish these more grand movements and structural pieces. There we go. Okay, now from here, we're going to grab some Ultramarine Blue, Mars Black, Titanium White. I'm starting with about an equal mixture of all of them. I'm going to double down just a hint on the Ultramarine Blue. This is going to be essentially for a misty fog in the background, and I'm going to apply it essentially upon my mountain horizon. You know what? And upon applying it, I realize I want to double down on the Titanium White. I want it to be a bit brighter. That's perfect. So I'm going to run this all the way across, right underneath our last application, and then I'll softly blend it up using the filbert brush so it looks like we have this nice bluish mist in the background. Now, from there, we're going to recut in our mountains. I'm going to do these initially with an ultramarine blue, a Mars black, hint of titanium white, but an equal mixture of ultramarine blue and Mars black in this. And if you struggle with drawing, and I would recommend resketching this in rather than just painting it in the way that I am, but here I'm using the larger flat-headed brush to cut all of these little protruding mountains into the background. Some of them are taller, some of them are shorter. What's really important is that you make them unique and it doesn't just look like a collection of triangles in the background. You also want them to look fairly sharp. And if you find it difficult using the larger flat-headed brush, you can actually switch on over to the smaller flat-headed brush in my brush set. Great for little details. And here we can have significantly more control, work intentionally, and render something that's nice and sharp. Also, if you're new here, you can get all of the brushes that I'm using in my brush set. It's linked in the video description. I use this set for every acrylic lesson here on the channel and have for the last, I think, 2 years at this point. So if you pick up that singular brush set, you can follow along with all of my latest acrylic lessons, and you'll never have to run out of the store thinking, oh no, I need that other brush. You'll just have exactly what you need. So should make things easier if you like to do a lot of painting. If you're a big fan of these various scenes. Now I'm going back in with a larger flat just because it is great at really covering space. Starting to bring it down a bit more. And then once we get down to about this halfway, maybe a little bit more point, I'm going to grab a lot more of our ultramarine blue, our titanium white, and we'll create a new mist pigment. It's bluish gray, but it's brighter than that which we had before. I'm going to apply that around the mountains and the bases. And then I'm going to softly blend that up into our mountains. And this is going to create a look of fog, a little bit of a gradient. This is only our first layer, so it'll look a little painterly, but it's a good start. That said, let's get you a little bit closer. Now from here, we're going to take a bit more of our ultramarine blue, a bit more of our titanium white. We'll make that mix even brighter, spread it out with the large flathead, but then we're going to switch on over to our filbert. We'll make sure that's nice and damp. Grab that brighter pigment, apply it to the base of our last application, and then with a sweeping motion, work that up into these mountains at the top. We're just going to build our layers till things look a bit more opaque. And the mountains should essentially get darker and darker as you move towards the top of them. There we go. That said, we still have to add snow. So before we add our final layers of this, we're going to do a bit of that. I'm also going to keep the mountains in the middle a little bit darker, just because the eye innately goes to the most dramatic contrast, and by keeping this area have the brightest brights, the darkest darks, the eye goes to the center. We did that with the clouds, with the bright highlights, and we're doing that again with the mountains. We're going to grab the smaller liner brush, lot of titanium white, hint of our cad red. We'll mix up something that's akin to a fairly light pink. We'll add in the smallest hint of a Mars black to desaturate it and just make it a bit more natural. And then we're going to go into the mountains and we're going to paint on little bits of snow towards the top. However, this is an incredibly detailed application, so I will get you a whole lot closer for the majority of this. So here we are, up close. We have our liner brush here, and again, we want that nice whitish pink. I'm going to go to the left-hand side of our peak. So every time there's a slope downwards, on the left-hand side of it, that's where I'm applying a lot of this highlight. I'm connecting it. And as you can see, initially it's not that prominent because we're applying it over such a dark background and we have a lot of water on our brush. However, through layers, we can build it up and make it look great. Also, leaving some of these areas a bit darker can be quite beneficial in general, just for the sake of creating those layers of depth. So I just added a hint of Naples yellow there. I'm going to do that towards the center. Now, as this dries, it'll get a bit darker, so it's stark right now, but it won't always be. And I like to double down on the areas that I really like in subsequent applications and layers. But very small areas, very intentional markings. And I think a real success as a whole. I'm also not bringing this far down by showing that the mountains here have a base through here. It kind of creates this illusion of a larger valley. It also creates a lot of scale, right? Because if the mountains aren't ongoing here, it means that they're fully in our sight line. And the smaller we make the entirety of the mountains, the farther back it looks as a whole. So, just playing with perspective a little bit by ending it towards the top. And we'll continue moving over here to the left-hand side. But I think it's probably going to get a little blurry for you just with the way the lens is set up. So, tell you what, we'll just do this one more mountain right here and then we'll move the camera for you. That said, this mountain, important. So, extra layers, extra highlights. It's in the center. We need that extra light. So, we do a good job right there. Now, as we take a step back, or as I like the detail, but I actually want to bring some of this together to be a little bit less structured in a tapped formation. I want it to be a bit more blocky. So I'm combining a lot of these markings on the left-hand side. Kind of continuing some of the movements down towards the bottom, but the goal here is to bring a lot of those applications together. And I think we did a great job of that. Now we're going to double down on the highlights in the center before we continue, because that is the most important visual space. And now we can kind of get a bit more playful again. And I start by doing a lot of taps. We can even do little mountains in front of our other mountains. That'll create extra depth. But I started all with taps and then I combine them when we feel it's right through additional taps and occasional little drags. I don't want too much over on the left and right hand side because I don't want to draw the eye over here too dramatically. But I think that's looking pretty great. There's real diversity in application styles and mountains, and again, this is just a simple detail in the background, but I like it a lot. Now, we need to make sure all of this is dry so we can apply this same mist over top it a little bit just to soften it a little bit more. Okay, so from here, we're going to start moving down to the bottom mountains. We're going to do this in a couple of sequences. We're going to do this one, then we'll probably move into here, then we'll move into here, and by breaking it up, it just becomes a lot more easy to discern what we're doing, where we're doing with a lot of detail. That way it doesn't become overwhelming and we don't kind of take steps to overlook really important details. With that, we're going to start with some Mars Black, some Ultramarine Blue. This is going to be the darkest mixture we have thus far. Add in some extra titanium white just to brighten it a little bit. And then we're going to take this and we're going to cut along the top of our most protruding mountain in the center there. Now we're going to have a lot of titanium white and ultramarine blue for the snow, but so now we're moving down here to these bottom mountains, and well, again, we are going to do a lot of ultramarine blue and titanium white, different lighter values. I am going to just kind of figure out exactly where everything is. I'll use the larger body of this brush to block in the bottom portions, which don't have much, if any, snow. And I'll just move that upwards. You can see that there's a bit of a jagged movement, but it's consistently evolving. It's unique. And we want something that feels organic in that way. We have a large peak here with a lot of highlight and snow, and for that I'm just going to do a little bit of a tap with my brush to essentially delegate where that snow is going to be. I'm doing it on the other side, and the idea is that the peak is right here and it kind of moves down. So we're working on both sides to show the snow as it falls in the directions as it does. Then we'll block that in. We have a larger opening of snow right down here towards the bottom, so we'll leave that out as well. And we probably want to do 2 layers for the sake of making it nice and thick. Though I do think I'm going to go back up and just do little taps along the edge of the bottom of the snow here, just to show that it is working in a similar way to this, but it's a little bit farther away. We don't see as much detail. And again, it'll look rough in the beginning. That's okay. We will get there. Now, as a really fun update, I think I finally figured out the lighting in this space. It's something I've been working on throughout this lesson, and I think I just found the right amount of blinds to close, what lights to turn on, and apologize if the color is a little bit strange through different portions of this, but it really is just figuring out your lighting scenario, how it works throughout the day. That's something we all should be cognizant of in general. I actually remember when I was in high school, I was working on this painting, and I stayed up all night to do it, and I remember it being 4 or 5 in the morning, and I loved it. However, when I took it outside that morning to go to school, I realized that it was a lot colder looking than it actually was. And that was really just a result of the fact that I was painting in warm lighting. So all of the hues that I had this interjected warmth, which wasn't, innate to the colors. So it was a great lesson in that we should always be aware of the lighting in which we paint in, as it does have an impact. And here, I've been trying to paint mostly with natural light, which is interesting because, sometimes in the morning you have a bit more of a cool light, the afternoon you have a warmer light. Sunsets can be just such a fun spectrum, but it makes it interesting. And that's just what I've been playing with throughout this painting. It's something you should be fairly aware of. Big recommendation I have is getting some adjustable lights that can either be warm or cool. Lots of softboxes and photography lighting can be really useful. I have a couple in here, not for photography, but just to help me paint on days where colors are a little bit different. I can close all of the blinds and just work with those. in a bit more of a controlled way. So it's something to consider if you've never played with the lighting in your space. You can probably improve your paintings a lot just by seeing them in a more correct fashion. Anyways, through here, I'm essentially just creating a mid to light gray that I'm applying now into the openings of the previously painted mountains. Much like the other portion, you probably want to do multiple layers to build it up properly, but this is something where we're going to make it a lot brighter. We're going to interject darker portions and a lot of details, but we need to just get it started, and we're doing so by filling in that previously open spot with this mid to light gray. And then once we have a good amount of it, an amount we like, we can take that brush, we can put it down, we can switch on over to our small liner, make sure that's nice and damp. We can pick up our darker pigment that we were previously working on, and we can just kind of interject litany of minute taps that work in a similar way to our previous applications. So there's a bit of a tap and a drag. It's kind of playing with that leading line that we previously worked in with the larger flathead. And this is just a really easy way of creating a lot of detail with intent. You can see I'm kind of cutting off some of these lines and making them dissipate. The more ornate, the more unique we can make this space, the better. Though I am going in with a less is more approach initially, where I'm not doing too much in any one area. I'm doing a little bit and then I'm jumping to another area. I'm doing a little bit, I'm jumping to another area. I'm doing that very purposefully just so that we can really gauge what it's like with a lot of detail, with a little bit of detail, and then we can find the point in which we love, and we can double down on that. So right now, heading on over to the other side, give this side a bit of a break visually, just so I can get a little mental refresh. I like that. Grab some extra water. Create some openings in the snow. It doesn't always have to connect to this downward darker portion. There we go. And then this is getting lots of little trees, at least the implication of them. So it's just a little vertical tap. Maybe it's a stroke, but it's just a small implication. Then we can grab the whitish gray that we had, and we can start building that downwards in the same style of little taps. And again, this is just an opportunity to interject additional control. Here we're going to have some snow. Just a nice bed of it towards the bottom of this mountain. And then there we can have a bit more. Starting to like it. Starting to come together. Now you can use a very watery mix for a semi-transparent application, or you can go in with something a bit more opaque if you're sure you're going to enjoy those markings. I'm going to have these protrude down a little bit more than in the reference photo, just because I like the detail a lot and I think that this is our main subject. We can really double down on it. You can see how the strokes are starting to change though. Now it's kind of doing this wrapping effect around the peak. And then, of course, we can't neglect the background. It's going to have less detail, but still will have some. And again, I'm going to do more than the reference photo, but not a grand abundance more. Just add a hint in this background portion. And this doesn't have any real taps in it, it's more just drags because it's so far away that you're not really going to see real detail. Not like that, not like we do here. But this whole area is about the subtlety of taps and just bringing things together. Alright, so here we have a bit more of a distant shot, and we're going to double down on our gray. However, this time we're going to make it a little bit brighter, just by a hint. And this is something that we progressively build up over layers. We don't just go with the first one, because again, it's acrylics. These need layers to build properly, but also because it gives us an opportunity to double down on the areas that we love and really build some depth through the change of value. By adding this slightly brighter mixture over portions of our mid value, we essentially make it look like these areas are facing the light to a greater degree. They're catching more light. They're creating an added dimension on the mountain. We're still leaving little openings of the initial gray showing through, and that's great because it essentially creates more depth. The more values you have, the more depth you have. So we're doing a very active effort there. We can throw this in our distant mountains to a point. Just have hints of that highlight working through the backs of them. There we go. I like that a lot. Now, let's get playful. Let's interject a hint of red. We have warmth on the horizon, and I think it'll make these mountains pop in a really beautiful way if we also have a hint of warmth on them. Again, it's one of those things where a scene like this, you could paint it so quickly and rush through, or you can add little details like this, or the Naples yellow and the stars, different things like that that take the extra time, but they're really beautiful subtleties in person, and they make it a much more engaging and subconsciously engaging painting. I think they're much more rewarding. I think that there's so much you can do with it if you're just willing to put in that time. And that's what we're doing here. Taking a rather simple concept and we're making it the best we can. A lot of warmth in this. Very good. I like that a lot. Okay, so from here, let's go back to the Mars Black mix just for a second. Because realistically, as we do that, we're interjecting a lot of light, and then we probably want to make things a little bit darker again, and it's really this back and forth between the two. And this is, again, why we kind of separated the mountains into a couple of different portions and structures. This just would have been a lot to take care of and keep track of throughout the entirety. But really like these for now. Maybe we go back in and add an extra layer of highlight towards the top. A lot of titanium white. Hint more of the red. Titanium white. Want to be careful not to overdo it. But we're not going to go over all of the highlights. Now we're being extra particular. So from here, get a little bit closer and we'll start working on this area. I'm going to begin with a larger flat-headed brush, a lot of titanium white, hint of Mars black, a little bit more of our ultramarine blue in here than we used in there. We're going to progressively use more blue as we go towards the bottom, so we get farther away from this warmer pink / Naples yellow light. So we'll just interject a bit more of that blue, maybe a little bit more Mars black, but not a super dramatic version in either direction. We'll connect it to the snow we started creating the larger beds of through here. Maybe we'll do a second layer just to make sure it's nice and thick. And then as we come through here, this bed of snow really continues. We have this almost flat, if it wasn't snow, prairie-esque land. Or if it wasn't snow, it wasn't winter. And then we'll also apply some to the tops of these distant mountains. Just like so. Again, try to make it nice and thick. So if you apply the paint and then you really spread it out, go back and try to apply a little bit more. Then we can have just little hints through here. But for now, I'm pretty happy with that. We'll just make sure it's thick. Make sure the edges are sharp. We can do that with a little bit of extra water on our brush. And then once we have this applied, it doesn't need to dry, but we're going to grab some Mars black. Again, a bit more of our ultramarine blue. This is similar to what we had over there. And we'll start working in our negative space. So you can see how it kind of dips into this valley in a couple of spots, and then it comes back up, and then it can dip back down again. And this is going to be lots of lines of trees and rocks, different unique subjects. And we're going to paint those in, but not quite yet. Right now we're just kind of doing some blocking. I have a lot of trees up there. And then as we move down, we get into something a bit more gray. But in the reference photo, I think I'm going to go a little bit darker though. I think I'm going to make it darker in the corner for the sake of adding a vignette, making it feel nice and dramatic. And this will be a tree line, and then this will be a tree line. This will be trees. I have a lot of trees going on here. So, as we step back, let's talk about simplified forms. If you think about it, we have 1, 2 stretches that kind of come up and turn into triangular shapes here. Then on this side we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They protrude to different points. This one's wider, this one's a lot shorter. They're all different, and that's important. And then we have 2 that kind of come down from here. There's a little bit of a wiggle. It's unique in itself. And this kind of tucks itself triangularly into the opening of this one, and this kind of tucks itself there. So we can break it down into very simple shapes should we want to, and I like to do that. Also, general concept for mountains, the top portion and the very bottom typically have the snow. The midsection with the steep incline doesn't, because snow isn't like catching to that degree in that area. It's easier to sit on the top and it's easier to sit and stay on the bottom. So the midsection of our mountains darker. Here we have a midsection of our mountains and some trees. Again, darker, tops brighter, bottoms brighter. General rules, you don't have to live by them, but they can help you understand and simplify. Now, again, I want the bottom right-hand side of my piece to be a bit more dark and vignetted. So I'm going to go in with a bit more Mars black, a little bit of our ultramarine blue. Build up that layer. I might do that a couple of times. But for now, it's looking good. Now we're going to put that brush down. We're going to pick up our liner brush. I'm going to make that nice and damp. And this is where, yet again, we interject detail. So what I'm going to do is all of these edges that are fairly straight, I'm going to change them into little lines. Lots of vertical lines, ones that imply trees. As such. And they're going to be much bigger, closer to us. And as you get farther away, they're going to be smaller. Let me get you a bit closer though. So from there, get a little bit closer, and we continue working with that same mixture. Our strokes will get a little bit shorter. These are a lot of fun. We're just implying the trees in the background. And I'm doing a lot of it with just a tap, it's not even a drag. That'd be too big. And then we can start working them out into the negative space. Include some in the middle. Again, I'm deviating from the reference photo a little bit. But I really like what's going on here. Now, this is one of those things where we're going to continuously move back and forth from being close to the canvas to being far away, because we're constantly gauging detail. If we're adding too much in any one area, if the trees are becoming far too abundant, or if they're just the right number. In the distance, I'm not even doing a vertical tap, I'm just doing taps. And that's typically enough to imply the trees. So the way you paint trees varies dramatically throughout the system. And it's one of those things where I think when we start painting, again, we ask ourselves like, oh, how do I paint this? How do I paint that? When realistically there are 100 ways to paint every subject. It's about finding the way that you like, but also being mindful of how far away it is and how that works with perspective and distance. And in this scenario, some of our trees are painted simply with a vertical line, while others are simply a dot. In other paintings, it's 100 steps in itself, where we're painting every piece of foliage and wrapping light around it, and it's this very deep process. None of them is right or wrong, it's just figuring out where each application style deserves to be. See, I think we have a lot in this section, and I like when it kind of builds out from these larger areas in a prominent way, and then it lessens as we get towards the larger openings, where we can still have some, it's just not as many. Now I think we go back up to the top here. Very good. So, from here, again, we'll reestablish some little lines of trees into the distance. Maybe they're on top of this mountain. That's something we haven't really played with yet, right? And because we haven't, I think it's a good idea to do a little bit of it, especially on a section like this. I can see in the reference photo there are a lot of almost lines of open space and trees, and I like that. It's a bit unique, so we'll do something similar. And again, if you'd like help with the drawing process or any of that, I do have the traceable up over on Patreon. the reference photo, the material was the ad-free version. If you're watching this on YouTube and there are ads and you don't want that again, Patreon's how you do that. There's a link to it in the video description. And you can also get some fun stuff like all of my ebooks, like that of Acrylics for Beginners, which is essentially the essentials. Everything you need to know about acrylic painting before you jump into your first acrylic painting. Got a bunch of ebooks with flowers in them and various landscapes. You can also get access to our exclusive Facebook group where people share their renditions of these pieces, and I always personally find it pretty inspiring, so you likely will too. But again, it's a great way to support the channel, and you can get some pretty cool things. That said, if you can't do it, also no worries. Just glad you're here, having fun, enjoying the lesson with me. I love that there's still so many people out there who love and appreciate the traditional medium of paint and making something with our hands, something we can hang in our homes. Appreciate you being a part of the community. Really just trying to sharpen some of these, make them a bit more pronounced. And this is one of those things where, again, we might overdo it, and that's okay, because we can always go back and add more snow in a subsequent layer. And we're definitely going to go back in and add more snow. There we are. Now we'll take a step back. We'll move to our lighter gray. This time we're going to make it a little bit darker than the previous version, just because we're getting farther away from the central portion we want to draw the eye to. But we still do want these highlights of snow. And we can create little pathways throughout the mountain and little openings that maybe we lost in that process. So it's one of those things where we have all of those darker interjections in the light area, and now we have light interjections in the darker area. We're going back and forth with those until we have it just the way we want it. And this is why it's such a fun subject to work on. You really don't have to worry one way or the other about what you're doing, because you can always just easily go back and do more of this. But I do recommend trying to do it from a little bit of a distance. So I have the camera farther back so you can see it as a whole. And again, rather than holding the brush like this, you can hold the brush like this. Give yourself an extra, probably 2 feet between yourself and the canvas. It'll make the markings a bit more randomized, but that's actually quite nice in terms of making sure that you aren't subconsciously doing the same thing over and over again and rendering too much repetition in your piece. There we go. I like that a lot. Go back to the darker pigments. We're just about done this section, but just do a hint more. There we go. Now, admittedly, I forgot something. There should be a mountain right here in the background. I don't want it to be as dark as what we've established through here, so I'm going to use a little bit more titanium white. I'm mixing that into our previous mix, or at least on top of it. That way I can noticeably see that it is, in fact, a little bit brighter. And then we'll just work that over and through there. Nice and simple, nice and easy. Doesn't really need much detail. We can go back in with a little bit of our almost whitish gray highlight later on should we want to. And then we can kind of tuck it behind the back of this mountain. But just an extra added layer of depth in the background. Again, nice and easy application. From there, this is going to have a lot of trees in it, but I am going to start with a whitish gray mix of snow, and then we're going to progressively make it a bit more blue as we move backwards, and in addition to that, we are going to make it a little bit darker. Then we'll apply our trees and our rocks on top. But right now, just starting with this very clean cut application across the top of it, across the back. Again, a little bit more of our blue, a little bit more of our black. We'll work that right underneath, like so. Connect that into some of our previous snow in this area. Then, yet again, we double down on our blue, we double down on our Mars black. Make that nice and smooth. Do a soft gradient. Though if you do have brush strokes through this, it isn't a bad thing, because it just looks like movements in the snow and various volumes. As long as the lighter values are on top, you're in a great place. That said, I do want the white on the top to be more reminiscent of what we have in the background. So I'm going to go over that again on the top and just make it feel like there's a bit more of a natural transition between that which we have here and that which we have there. And there's a lot of paint on the canvas right now, so it's difficult to really make a big impact with that. Because the more paint you have, the more you disrupt that which you have on your palette and on your brush, because it's always blending with that which you have on your canvas. So you might want to let it dry a little bit if you're in a situation like me, or you can do what I'm doing, and that's just continuously add it until you get what you want. It can be a little more tricky, but it is doable. And then maybe I'll do a little bit of a blend into there. That way it feels like this area is swooping down and then connecting back in there. It's creating this larger depth as a whole. I like that. You can also do a little bit more of that highlight towards the top, and have it progressively, again, get more blue and dark towards the corner, though the real darkness, the real vignette, comes in the form of trees. As said, I do want this to dry, so I'm going to take a 4 or 5 minute break, maybe get a glass of water, stay hydrated, maybe get a snack. We can get a little shaky if we're not, taking care of ourselves, so do that, and then we'll work on the next step together. Alright, so we're taking a step back, we've let that fully dry, and now we're going to mix the darkest mix yet. This is Mars Black. It's a good amount of ultramarine blue, that way it still has that cool richness. We're adding the smallest amount of a titanium white, but really it's just a minute amount. Then we're switching to our liner, and to establish scale and depth in this, I'm going to render the biggest trees we have yet. They're going to be right here towards the bottom left, and I'm actually going to paint trees with some level of detail. So that means we're starting at the top. I'm making a vertical line downward, and then through a series of taps I'm rendering branches on both sides. Some of these trees are going to overlap, especially towards the bottom. I want a lot of them in the bottom left-hand corner for the sake of building that larger vignette. But by creating trees that are this big, it makes these look a lot smaller. And that's a big part of painting and creating depth. It's creating the same subject in different areas of depth for the sake of showing various sizes. And it's that contrast of size which really speaks to scale. So these are really beneficial, not in the fact that we see detail, but that they make all of these trees feel much more far away, vast. It just does a lot more for the painting than adding trees in itself. That said, I know this is a highly detailed subject, so let me get you a bit closer. So here we are, closer to the canvas. And again, a lot of these trees are crafted with an initial vertical line, and then I go in for little taps towards the top, the left and right, and then they get bigger and bigger. I try to make it not look too symmetrical, so there's variance on the left and right hand side, and then I start creating a new tree. And I want them all to be a little bit different from the one next to them. I'm also going to progressively make them smaller as we move farther and farther away from that corner. So here you can see they're getting a bit tiny. And some of these trees are just going to be babies. So next to the larger trees we can also do smaller trees, and that isn't a reflection of depth, that's just a reflection of the fact that there is variance within the trees themselves. And it's really that mix of sizes and volumes in these simple shapes which make that painting so much more interesting, because it doesn't create that depth, but it also makes you question depth when, again, there's a big tree next to a little tree right beside each other, because then that does imply that one is simply more grown. That's an added factor. So even when subjects are this simple, there's still a lot you can do in a painting to make it interesting. And then again, as we get towards this mid section, our trees are probably going to become similar to the size that they have over here. So they're not big. They're not that small. You can see I'm jumping around a lot, trying to create lots of little clusters. But now we're at that point where I'm barely adding any extra detail to them, because they are far away to the point where we're not seeing it to that same extent. I'm also going to paint in a little bit of exposed rock towards the top here, and that's going to be done through a lot of pitter-patters and horizontal line work. Occasionally there's a larger opening, like so, like that. Really love this mix of textures and subjects. It's one of those things where alone they look good, together they have the potential to look great. And again, here's just a lot of sharp open markings. We can always reinterject more snow on top of it if we want to, but I do want this bottom corner to be pretty dark. So there's going to be a lot of trees, there's going to be a lot of open rock. Just like that. And now again, let's start to spread out a little bit. I'm partially following the reference photo in that I can see lines of trees that work this way. And we're going to start combining them, and we can have that move down into here. You can see very natural movement and progression. We can kind of continue these trees now up kind of behind part of this larger slope, and then we have more next to them, and all of a sudden, this large piece, which was disconnected, is now connected. Feels like it just fits in to the space in a very natural way. And then through additional little trees, we can bring this section and this section, and now we're starting to amalgamate different clusters in very natural ways. Here's a little bit of a wider view, just so we can see how everything's connecting and there's larger forms, there's larger patterns. Ideally, a lot of these trees turn into leading lines. So you can see this is a bit of a line, this is a bit of a line. There are breaks in it, and we need those breaks so that it still looks natural. But we are kind of subconsciously trying to build those movements. And sometimes they'll move on top of each other and create these interlinking portions. Interlink. You know, it's kind of a Blade Runner 2049-esque palette, a little bit. Do have those pinks and the blues, and kind of really what that franchise inspired in so much great sci-fi work. Last year I bought a book of the cinematography from that, and it was one of those things where you really just see a lot of painting with light, and I thought it was really inspiring. It's one of those things where there's a lot of cityscapes, but there are also these desolate, really beautiful landscapes, and it also shows you that I think that scenes don't innately have to be warm to be something beautiful and highly connective. I think this scene is pretty cool naturally, but there's something ethereal about it. There's a bit of magic in it, and it's definitely fun to play with. We haven't done a painting like this on the channel in a while, but it's one of those things where I feel like there were a lot of simplified versions that I've done in the past, and I kind of just finally figured out how to add a lot of details that I thought would make it much more unique and interesting. I think we're there. I'm really, really pleased with how it's come along. Now, toward the end of a lot of these lessons, I like to give you a little keyword, something you can use in the comments to note that you are part of, on average, 13% who makes it to the end of these long videos. It's almost like a little badge of honor, a little thing where I'll see it, I'll know you made it to the end, everybody else who made it to the end will also know. But it's typically a subtle word we can use. Changes every time, but with this one, maybe the word will be rolling. So we have these rolling mountains into these rolling valleys, and these clouds kind of roll along. It's there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of flow in this. You could also go with flow, rolling or flow. If you include one of those words in a comment, and you can either just type the word or you can type it as a comment. But if you do that, I'll know that you are part of, again, on average at 13%. It's always fun to see who can get it repeatedly, who's watching all the lessons. But I look forward to seeing one of those two words in the comments. So, now stepping back, we can do a couple of things. We can continue to add these trees and create those lines that we really like, that create connective tissue and scale and lead the eye, work well with the little bits of mountain and rock that we have showing through. But we can also, now that we have this established, create the brightest pink. Maybe we'll interject a hint of blue as well. And we can add that to the tops of our mountains, because now we have an indicator of how bright we want things to be, how much detail we have, and we can build this to an even greater extent, provided we feel like it doesn't stick out too much. This is something to do to make sure that this is the primary subject. It is where the eye goes, and if you feel like this gets really complicated, this is a great technique to make your primary subject a lot more interesting. We can also add hints of it into this distant mountain, which I forgot to paint initially, admittedly. And then we can just have that kind of trail off, get lost behind there. Do a little bit more through here, but just building this up to be that prominent piece should really be the ultimate goal. But we still wanted to do so in a more subtle way. We don't want it to feel like it sticks out awkwardly or like it just overwhelms the rest of the painting. We want it to be prominent, but not too prominent. We can also add just a hint of this towards the tops of the right-hand mountains, really towards the top, and then maybe just a hint towards the top of this left-hand one as well. And that'll build us some extra depth. It'll make it all come together in a beautiful way. And then we can take that same pigment and we can tap on some additional little stars. And now we're taking that pigment from the bottom of the painting, we're building it into the top of the painting, and that's just going to continue to make it feel like it doesn't pop too much if it does pop to a great degree. Though we've had a long time to live with the sky, so at this point we're probably aware of how we want to build it, what we want to add, and I'm really happy with the general progression. You can do a lot more stars than I did. I kind of wanted to keep it not subtle, but less dramatic than it could be, because it could be so much more. But I think this is a nice balance. We have our clusters, we have our connective stars in them. I'm tapping it with the liner brush as softly as I can so that I don't get any big markings, and then we can throw individual little markings out into the sides so that the eye doesn't hyper focus in a unnatural way. You can also, again, soften them with your finger. And this is just one of those techniques where you can really just go and paint and paint and paint. And as you know with me, I'm somebody who does naturally have a hard time putting down the brush. And admittedly, I'm having a hard time putting down the brush. I'm having a lot of fun. I hope that you're having that fun too. I hope that you feel like this lesson has inspired you to go and make something of your own. Remember, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. It can be wildly different as long as it gets you painting at the easel, on the canvas. I think that's a great thing. It's always the goal. Though again, if you want it to look very similar, you can find the traceable and reference photo up on Patreon with the ad-free version. We're also doing a big 24 by 24 inch painting. You can kind of see it in the background there right now. I'll have another episode up this week, but that's a bonus series we're doing, just in case you like to work big. Right here you can see I'm really just working on a lot of these stars. It gets more and more subtle as we get into the horizon because the horizon is so much brighter, but I do like having hints of them through there. Try to match the value of that horizon with these, and it'll be a beautiful transition downwards. That said, again, big thank you for being here. Big thank you for being a part of the community. I hope you're just enjoying yourself, that you feel inspired. that you're ready to go out, pick up that brush. And hey, if you've been painting along, hope it looks beautiful. I will be posting another lesson, hopefully next week again. Am moved in, working on kind of getting everything together, but we're at the point where we can do some paintings, and I do want another episode of the big guy up on Patreon. So there's a lot going on. We're back to painting, back to making art. I love it, and I hope you do too. So I know I'm rambling. I do this at the end of every video. If you haven't already, subscribe. But as always, above all, stay creative.